Our expert panel today includes contributors Scott Smith, who's on screen with us. Scott is the CEO Executive Director of SLO, the Housing Authority of San Luis Obispo County. Since 1984, he has housed thousands of lower income households throughout the Central Coast, including people and families experiencing homelessness and special needs groups, such as those struggling with mental illness and addiction. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you.
Ken Trigero, see, I need to practice that, is a Cal Poly graduate and joined People's Self-Help Housing in 2005. Ken brings 30 plus years of experience in housing development and finance to the organization, with a mission of bringing affordable housing with site-based services to the Central Coast. Ken oversees over $400 million in assets, including new construction, as well as acquisition and rehab rental projects. PSHH, as it's known, has successfully housed over 400 households formerly experiencing homelessness, a quarter of which are veterans. Welcome, Ken. So as we, I guess we'll get underway and hope that Veronica is able to join us in progress. She may be experiencing power outage. I had one earlier today, so it's very possible that that's what's keeping her from joining us today as well. But we'll go ahead and forge ahead here. And with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Marlis.
All right. Thank you very much, Cindy Marie. I appreciate it. And welcome to everyone who's watching. It's an honor and a pleasure to be moderating this series. As Cindy Marie said, this is the fourth in the series. And the first three focused on who the homeless are and what services that we provide to deal with some of the issues about why they became homeless and law enforcement's role in dealing with the issue. But of course, the ultimate goal of public policy is to provide permanent housing for the homeless. And so that this panel is crucial in understanding how we can go about that and how we can achieve that goal. So we will conduct this session like we did the three previous webinars. I will pose discussion questions to the panelists who will have the opportunity to respond. And we will leave time at the end for audience questions. So the webinar is scheduled to end at 1, and the panelists have agreed that if we go beyond, they will stay to make sure that we answer all of the audience's questions. So for folks in the audience, at any time during the webinar, you can use the Q&A button to type in your question, and we will collect them and answer them at the end. So let's begin with the first question, which is really to have each of you describe your agency's role in providing permanent housing for individuals experiencing homelessness. So why don't we start with you, Scott?
Okay, great. Thank you, Marlis, and thank you to the entire league for hosting this series of panels and the subject matter. It's timely. It's an issue our community has been talking about for a while, and I guess the big question is: are we making progress? Are we making progress in resolving it, or are things getting worse? My name's Scott Smith. I've worked in affordable housing for a very long time, since 1984, as mentioned in the introduction, and since 2012, I've worked for SLO, which is the Housing Authority of San Luis Obispo. And so I guess, just put simply, our organization, the sole mission is to provide affordable housing. And we do that in two primary ways. One is to develop and operate housing, physically housing that we would then own and operate. And usually we do that through a variety of types of partnerships. And then the other way is working really with private landlords under our Section 8 program. So that's the other big way that we house people, is housing that we own and operate. The other way is through this voucher program where we really pay the rent on their behalf. And the beauty of that program is that you utilize the existing housing that's out there, and we're able to utilize private landlords as part of the solution also. And that program, the person pays a portion of their income for rent, but they can't afford the whole thing, so we pay the balance under that program. So that's the ways that we're involved in the housing issue. Of course, we get involved in policies that relate to everything in the way of affordable housing and that kind of thing as well. And affordable housing is this big, huge, broad topic. So drilling down within that, then we have special programs for the homeless, because even in the affordable housing world, the homeless won't compete very well. We have long lines for all of our housing. The supply of affordable housing is very, very short supply relative to the need. And so unless you set up some priorities and special programs internally, the homeless population probably will not compete very well for that housing, as I use the word compete, just as they don't compete very well in the regular marketplace for market rate housing. But even in the affordable world, there's a lot of steps that a person has to take to get into that housing. So I think I'll leave it at that. I could get into a lot more detail about things, but I'm sure we'll have time to do that as well.
Yes, let me just ask one follow-up question. You talked about helping to pay the rent for people who cannot afford it. Where does that money come from?
That money predominantly is federal funds that come back to our county specifically for that kind of rental assistance.
Okay. So, and you do serve the entire county?
And we serve the entire county, that's correct. Right.
I just wanted to make sure we understood that.
Yes.
Okay, Ken, tell us about People's Self-Help Housing.
Right, thanks, Marilis. It's similar in a lot of ways to the Housing Authority, but there's a few differences, and so I might just talk a little bit about those. But a little bit more background on People's. Again, one major difference is we're a private nonprofit, not a public agency. Been here around since 1970, and we were started right here in San Luis Obispo by some couple volunteers who are concerned with affordable housing and good quality housing for their neighbors. And through a couple of church loans that got started, we started with a homeownership program, a mutual self-help program, a federal program. That's where the self-help comes into our name. And that program is something we still do. It's a sweat equity program by which we help first-time buyers and then builders build their own homes, along with, they do some of their own building. It's a really great program. We're still able to do about 30 homes a year with folks. We've done about 1,200 of those over the years. But over the years, we realized homeownership isn't for everyone, and we could actually have more impacts over of the affordable housing crisis here locally. And we started building apartments. So we've done about a couple thousand of those over the years. And we operate regionally too. So we're not only in the county. That's another a slight difference between the Housing Authority and how we operate. But we're full service in terms of being an affordable housing developer. Again, it's a 501c3, a charitable organization. So we do acquisitions of land, and we get the approvals for projects. We do all the financing, which is very unique for us. We're principally using the low-income housing tax credit program, a federal program administered by the state. Very successful back since 1986 and still going strong, fortunately. So we do that in-house, and we're a general contractor. So we build our own homes, try to have a little more control over our costs and quality and such. And then we're our own property management company. But a key component for how we want to serve all of our residents, including those who are experiencing homelessness, is through our supportive services. So we've got, let's see, about 15 or more staff people who are licensed clinical social workers or license ready, who are working with populations that we're bringing into our homes. And when we want to do that, we're taking this sort of assessment case management approach to figure out, well, what were the things that led you to become homeless? And let's address those kind of things. So that's a really key way of not only providing the house, but making sure that's a stable thing forever. We've had great success. We have people that are living in some of our housing that's spread all around. So they're not exclusively necessarily built for folks who are experiencing homelessness. Although we have done a couple of those. We've got 2 hotel conversions that we've done in the past. One is in the city of Ventura, one's in the city of San Luis or Santa Barbara. And those we've converted to single room occupancy kind of style housing, and have provided housing for those who were formerly homeless. That's working really great. That's been several years that we've done that. And most recently, we've been involved with the Housing Authority as a partner. They're the lead on this, but in the city of Paso Robles through a hotel conversion, a motel conversion, which we're just, that's just rolling out now. And probably Scott will want to talk a little bit more about that. So that's us.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, but first, all right, well, let me ask you how you're funded. Where does your money come from?
Right, yeah. So for most of our projects, the principal source is this low-income housing tax credit program, by which we compete for anywhere between 50 to maybe 70% of the funds for a project specifically. And that's a competitive program. It's like I say, administered through the state. We get an allocation of tax credits. It doesn't do us any good on its own because we need to actually raise equity. So what we do is, in essence, we sell those allocations to investors, private investors. A lot of times those are banks, the national banks, and some of the regional ones have been really great partners in that. So in exchange, they put equity into projects that is low cost to us because the benefit to them is really the tax benefit. So rather than having a high return on their equity from the project, we're able to just keep that equity in really forever. And that's how we're able to keep the rents very low and affordable. As we define it, usually it's hopefully around 30% of whatever that household makes, including a homeless individual. The rent shouldn't be more than about 30% of that. Then we need a bunch of other sources, so we cobble together other financing, but principally it's through this private-public partnership program that we get our main funding for projects.
Okay, and I think, Scott, do you want to tell us a little bit more about the Paso project? Because that is fairly new, and I know it's an exciting project for our whole county, and somewhat unique, really, I think.
Yeah, I think it is unique, and so what the Paso project is, it's a collaboration between 3 groups: SLO, People SelfHelp Housing with Ken, and El Camino Homeless Organization, which is ECHO, and they're active primarily in North County, Atascadero, and Paso Robles now. And so the long and short of it is that we purchased or I should say the Motel 6, because I think there's only one in Paso Robles, and we purchased that, and we converted it, and part of the conversion is still in process, but we converted it to housing, and then also a portion of it to overnight shelter rooms. So the way that breaks down is it's over 100 rooms in total. So there are 60 rooms that we're converting to studio apartments, and those come with support services. So we have a licensed social worker that is leading up the comprehensive case management for each client. And then, so that's 60 permanent supportive housing units, and then 42 overnight shelter rooms. And part of the key on that is, first of all, that there is no emergency shelter in Paso Robles, and their homeless situation has grown worse over the years, and they've just like all communities, they've been struggling with the issues. So, and at the same time, this pandemic hit. So the concept behind this sheltering there was that these are kind of COVID safe sheltering rooms. So it's not congregate where you have larger amounts of people in one large room. It's pretty much individual rooms for the overnight sheltering part. So the beauty of that project is it is serving people right off the streets. It's serving folks that are literally homeless, many of them chronically homeless. The average person moving in has been homeless for more than a year that has moved into the complex. It's operating now, and we're accepting applications, we're filling the units. But what's remarkable is how quickly the project has moved from nothing to being in operational stage, which it really is today. I can't believe we're already in May today. I was going to say it's only March, but we're already in May. But we just went kind of from an idea during the summertime, more or less, to actually buying it in December, to being operational it became operational really the first month. I think ECHO went in and started operating the shelter rooms right away. So that's what our board, we have a volunteer board as well. That's what they remark at frequently, because we all see how long it takes to get a project done. And what's remarkable about this is how quickly it provided over 100 units of one type of housing or another. And so that's what Home Key is.
That's a great story. I'd like to explore the kind of public policy changes that the panelists think are necessary to increase the supply of permanent housing for individuals experiencing homelessness. So Ken, let's begin with you. What kinds of public policy changes would you like to see, or do you think are needed to increase the supply?
Sure, yeah. One really beneficial thing that I think could happen more. Some communities are doing this, and I would refer to it as by right zoning, meaning we can do these kinds of projects that we're talking about sort of by right without having a long drawn out process. In some of the communities that are doing this, they're incorporating as part of their general plan updates, their housing element updates specifically, to look at certain zones of the city, and it could be an overlay zone. It doesn't mean that those particular areas are automatically going to be used for this kind of housing that we may be talking about, but it just enables property owners who do own those parcels within those areas, should they choose to want to pursue an affordable housing type of project, to be able to propose it without going through, starting from zero, so to speak, doing a big, drawn out process. Rather, that the question of whether it's appropriate can all be done during the general plan public process, a very public process. Housing element update is the same, where there's a lot of outreach and workshops and ability for the whole community to opine about whether they feel like that's a good thing. What it does for folks like ourselves is it just eliminates years, sometimes literally, for projects to happen. And by eliminating time, it eliminates risk. So more folks are more in a position to propose projects, because they can, know that there's a little bit more certainty there at the end of the process. And time costs money, so it makes projects less costly. So by right zoning is a big deal. That's one thing. And then maybe I'll just mention another thing, which a lot of communities are doing or looking into, It's in general, it's referred to as inclusionary housing, like an ordinance or some programs that have to do with incorporating similarly, really incentivizing or make it more mandated really to do affordable housing, especially when there is a for market rate project that comes to town, wants to propose some higher end housing. That's like the only opportunity for a lot of big pieces of land to do any housing, right? And if that's recognized and acknowledged that if you're gonna do some high end housing, contribute something toward affordable housing. That contribution can take many forms, and I think those are the best kind of inclusionary housing policies or ordinances that have multiple ways at meeting that. Some have, the ability for the market rate developer to donate land for an affordable housing project. They can certainly develop it themselves. They could, in some cases, pay a fee in lieu of actually doing the housing. Those fees are really valuable for affordable housing developers who know how to use the programs, and they can use that bit of money there, put it together with other monies, has some leveraging value. So that's been a pretty good successful thing. It slowed down a little bit through the recession and just never took back off in some communities. But again, the crisis is back, unfortunately. It's even more pronounced, it feels like now, post-COVID, since not a lot of production has happened in between. So I think that's another thing that communities hopefully will, policy-wise, will continue to look at or increase.
Tell us about the public policy changes that you'd like to see.
Ken hit the two big ones that are, and those are really local policy changes. Pretty much the one by right, housing by right, which is really a land use policy, and the other is inclusionary housing, where you have larger tracts going in, and it's a way of inclusionary comes from the word include, and it's really says that if a larger tract of housing is getting approved, there is going to be a certain percentage that has to be affordable. The inclusionary one, because we have very scarce resources. The scarcest amongst them being our land and our water and our sewer services. And so if we want to grow in an equitable way as a community, we need to make sure that we're providing for all levels of the economic population locally. And then by right, I just can't emphasize enough how important it is to not discriminate against persons based upon their income, which is really a disguised thing that happened for many years, and you don't see it as much anymore, but it certainly can slow the process way down to where to get any kind of housing built literally is years. It takes years to make it happen. And a good example of by right is the Motel 6 project in Paso. That was a by right project. And our board was just amazed at how quickly it happened, because we all know we develop projects and it takes 3 years is fast tracking, and so that was a by right. And we have, I think, 7 local governments in this county, if you include the county itself, and each one of them has their own distinct land use policies. And so we would like to see all 7 of those go to a by right when it comes to affordable housing.
Marlis, I'm gonna turn on the mic for Jana.
Okay, great. We'll take a pause here.
Hello, Jana, are you there?
I am here. Can you all hear me?
We can.
If I had a way to change my camera, I would do that as well, but I don't seem to have that option yet. So it's a pleasure to be with you. Sorry, we're having some technical problems. We had a virus come into our email system that has compromised this email. and I've been following much of the discussion with Scott and Ken.
Good.
What I'd like to add is that there are resources available to help people move into affordable housing units. That's the role that Five Cities plays in terms of providing rental and move-in deposit assistance for those that are income qualified. But as you've heard today, the challenge is simply a supply that has been difficult for us to keep up with, and COVID has not been kind.
Tell us a little bit, though, about exactly what it is that your agency does to help get the homeless into the permanent housing.
So we have a team of what we call case managers on our staff. Veronica Kablayan is our director of programs, and she oversees them. And it starts very simply with people seeking assistance coming in, and us trying to figure out what the problem or the barriers are that have really been the challenge. So it may be that they've lost housing for one reason or another. It might be financial, might be illness, might be loss of job, any number of things. So we will do what we call a coordinated entry assessment, which really is just a conversation to figure out what the barriers are of why folks may not have stable housing, or why they might be at risk of housing. We do both homeless prevention services as well as move-in assistance. And then the case managers will then work with the client to not only help them identify ways around it. We may be doing some financial literacy. We may refer them for some legal assistance. But more often than anything, it's really kind of just diving in and unraveling whatever the challenges are, and then helping them figure out how to search for housing. We do a lot of coaching about, how to stand out when you're applying for housing, or with regard to homeless prevention, working with your landlord to figure out how to either pay your rent, pay back rent. We may be able to assist with that. So we have financial resources, but we also have our case managers that are really housing coaches. In addition to that, then we do a lot of housing navigation, just in terms of working with landlords and trying to identify new housing units that landlords that might be willing to participate in our program. We work a lot with People Self-Help Housing and with the Housing Authority. And so we may provide bridge rent or deposit. If someone qualifies for a Section 8 voucher, for example, we may be able to provide the move-in assistance that then Scott's team would pick up with a voucher, for example.
Okay. And would you like to add anything to the question about the kind of public policy changes that may be needed in order to increase the supply of affordable housing?
Well, we depend a lot on these two agencies in particular, because they truly are mavericks in terms of making housing happen whenever possible. And I think we all have worked with the Housing Trust Fund to help leverage additional dollars. But I certainly concur that if the zoning doesn't allow for it, and the general plans are not set up to encourage affordable housing, there are some significant barriers to actually getting a project underway. And as you've heard today, just having the timeline required just to actually make a project happen requires a huge amount of tenacity on the part of our developers.
And to a follow-up to the public policy question, could you tell us about the impact that the COVID pandemic has had on your organization's ability to fulfill your mission? We can start with, whose turn is it? I think Ken.
Yeah, sure. So we were, as an agency, fortunately, we had some pretty good investment in technology. We were able to start working remotely for a large part of with most of our employees. But so much of what we do is face-to-face. And so especially on the supportive services that we were providing, we ended up, because we also, a segment of who we're serving is lower income seniors, quite a bit of fear and isolation happening. So while we weren't able to get face-to-face, we were able to, make the phone calls. And I think we were pretty successful in meeting all the extra referrals. I think our referrals doubled during this last, 12 months or so, 14 months, whatever it's been now. But fortunately, we were able to continue to meet the needs. I think a visible impact too was, since services is such a, I talked about funding and how we work for raising capital for projects, but the services there's not a great source for that. We offer this free to our residents, but we have to do fundraising. So quite a bit of fundraising went toward, meeting basic needs for COVID, and we're still trying to, raise money to pay for services. That's really about staffing, the professionals that we have on staff. So we weren't able to increase that, but yet our caseloads doubled. It was just a very strenuous time on employees. But fortunately, the residents, I think, have been well served. So, we've made it through in terms of renters our residents' ability to pay rent. That's gone better than expected. A lot of our folks are frontline workers, so actually, had to keep going to work, and we're glad to. But that brought on more complications with those households that had kids in school, or were not in school all of a sudden, and yet they couldn't work remotely. So our services really tried to plug more services in there. That was a big difference this year that we saw. Then the other part of fundraising, we just helped people, make sure they met some of the basic essentials if they were losing jobs. And a lot of our folks work in tourism and restaurants and retail. And so, of course, we all know that story impacted a lot of folks. So those are kind of the primary impacts that we saw.
Dan, how about you?
Yeah, very, very similar to what Ken had mentioned. And I will say that the ones that were already our clients, the folks out there, they're really in a good spot, because we, even before all these anti-eviction policies and so forth that sort of got put in place as emergency measures by the state and federal government during the pandemic time, we sort of had that practice anyway. So if somebody is down on their luck and they lose their job, we're gonna make sure they've got a safe, good place to live anyway. So we carried out that practice throughout COVID, so that the person was assured they weren't not going to lose their housing. I think what made it, we were learning, like everybody was, when this pandemic hit, about how do we continue to even operate. So, boy, we learned a lot. It was and it was quite interesting ride, but a lot of disbursement of staff working at home, working remotely, new technologies. But I'd say, at the end, I have to commend both our clients and our frontline staff, because we had some projects that we're renovating 14 different properties, 175 apartments throughout. These happen to all be located in San Luis Obispo, but all older housing. And so we took it on at once as one big project, 14 scattered sites, but they're all occupied right during the pandemic. And so we had to get in there, help people pack. They all had to be relocated during the renovations, then move back in. So that was quite an experience, in the context of COVID, with our frontline workers who were frontline heroes to us and to the community, who went in and had to work in those conditions, to the clients, and to the contractors we were working with, who, everything took longer, and still to some degree, everything's costing more money and taking longer because of the pandemic.
And Jana, the impact of the pandemic on 5 cities and your ability, especially related to your ability to, provide your housing services to the homeless.
So I've got Veronica with me finally, and I'll let her answer here briefly, but I think the thing that I would really ask people to understand is that, when the shelter at home ordinance or dictate came down, many of our clients didn't have homes. And so we spent a lot of energies trying to figure out how to keep people safe at the onset of the pandemic. And Veronica came up with some great programs that enabled us to keep people stable and get them into housing. And of course, subsequently, as things have gone on, we have found ourselves increasingly being asked to provide homeless prevention services. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Veronica.
Hi there. Sorry for the delay here. Yes, and I apologize. I'm not sure what, if you don't mind repeating the question.
COVID. How did COVID?
Yeah. So, well, we saw a lot of folks lose employment or have to stay at home because kids were not in school. So one parent had to stay home, so that reduced the income if they weren't already affected. The other is if it was a single parent and school was her childcare, then the single parent was also affected. So we saw a lot of folks, again, losing income, employment, needing assistance with rent, with food, with utilities. We often worked with with their landlords and asking them to be patient and that we would help create a solution, help solve that solution for them. And whether we could use our rental assistance program or asking our landlords to wait for this new California rent relief assistance that came through with the state.
Okay, and Scott mentioned the eviction moratorium, and that is a state law now, but it's scheduled to end at the end of June. What do you think is going to happen then? And how's it going to impact our county and just even the number of homeless? Jana and Veronica, do you want to start?
Well, hopefully folks are aware of the California COVID Rent Relief Program and they're able to apply for that assistance. Together, the landlord and the tenant would need to apply for that assistance. And we understand that a lot of the landlords have been out, they haven't been paid their rent. And then with this new program, they're being asked to also forgive 20%, which again adds to their hardship. But hopefully, our residents of San Luis Obispo County are taking advantage of the California Rent Relief Program, but also contacting our office for other rental assistance if they don't qualify or if the landlord did not apply on their end. So we're hoping that folks will reach out to us and hopefully we'll be able to utilize some of our homeless prevention funds to assist those folks and keep them from going into evictions.
And Ken, you both have properties that you rent as well as, so how's it going to impact you?
Right. So in our case, so far, we've been able to mitigate that partially through fundraising to make sure that people were able to have enough to pay for rent and for all the other essentials. We've worked with all of the folks who had difficulties though and have payment programs. So I think all of our residents are going to be okay right now. Now we'll see what the future holds for us, but so far we've been able to mitigate that for all of our residents. But to the wider community, I'm just sort of waiting to see what happens in terms of whether or not there are more evictions after this after June. But there's been a lot of support, and there's this assistance from the state. I want to hope that there's going to be enough support to get us through until people have their jobs back and we're in a better place. I'm hopeful.
And Scott, I think you mentioned that you have already had policies like that, but would you like to expand?
I think with us at HASLO and with people self-help and in similar groups, you've got a mission-oriented landlord. So we're in the business of housing people, not unhousing them. So we do, whatever it takes, even if there's behavioral issues that are mental health or otherwise related, we go the extra mile to get them the service, to get them to try to engage them in accepting the help. It's really so I don't have a concern for persons that are our resident already so much as I do for persons that maybe just have a landlord where they might be a fine person, fine landlord, but it's a business venture at the end of the day, and I do worry about them a little bit, but right now there is a very lot of money for emergency rental assistance. So I couldn't emphasize enough what Veronica and Jana were saying to reach out to them, and you can also access it directly through the state of California's website. But please reach out because there is money, not to pay just current debts that are owed on rent, but to go retro, I believe. And I'm not going to try to give out advice because that's Jana's, but maybe at the end too, maybe they could leave with you sort of a contact for that emergency assistance.
Yeah, good idea. All right, let's move on to the question about barriers. What are the main barriers to providing more housing units for individuals experiencing homelessness? Ken, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's largely, I think Jana said, it's largely a supply issue. Supply is really hampered by process and the time. I talked about that for us, but that same is true for the private developers. I think we need housing at all levels. And I know that Supervisor Ortiz-Leg mentioned just an example that we had. So in Cambria, for example, we bought a piece of property in 2006. We are still processing that. Part of what happened there and happens in some jurisdictions for different reasons is there are appeal processes and it goes back and forth. If we're within the along the coast, within the Coastal Commission, that's an extra layer. So there's lots of layers, lots of different jurisdictions involved. But as much as any of the process can be cut down, streamlined, we hear that a lot. But there really, I think, for that to happen, needs to be more collaboratively, the various jurisdictions. If we all think affordable housing and solving homelessness, or at least addressing it, is a priority, then all the competing objectives hopefully and should be aligned to meet the priority. There's community services districts, there's county, there's cities, and even regional. I know there's another question, what is a region? Where we're operating, Peoples is in the Tri-Counties area of San Luis Obispo County, Santa Barbara County, and Ventura County. We see a lot of similarities across the counties, and regionally, that's what I mean by regional. In my case, we can solve these things, I think, better together. So more collaboration. Maybe the lack of collaboration in some cases is a barrier, I guess is what I'm saying. But I think a real key is going to be, going forward, even more collaboration. And that involves our market rate developers as well as various cities and counties. It's happening, but I think we need more of it.
Okay. And Veronica, do you have anything to add to that? What do you see as the main barriers to providing more housing units for individuals experiencing homelessness? I know you've experienced some neighborhood opposition, and that is also a barrier, I expect, but what can you add?
Well, I agree that inventory plays a big part of our need. It is a need, but in addition to that is affordable housing, just housing in general for folks. We work with one landlord that really supports our efforts in housing our families and our individuals, but she's also running out of inventory herself. But in addition to that, inventory, but also I want to go back to what Ken said was just collaboration. So supportive housing. I know Paso Home Key did a great job with obtaining some units with supportive housing for our folks who are experiencing homelessness, and a lot of our folks need that support, that extra support with mental health or with addiction. So a collaboration with supportive housing would be really important.
And Scott?
I agree with what's been said. I guess I'd like to add, we need a lot more resources put into mental health, addiction recovery, and long-term case management, because even if we get somebody into the housing, their chances of being successful are limited over time if we cannot access adequate levels of mental health care, long-term case management, recovery type services. And the other comment in that regard is that there are some homeless that you'll see that, I mean, services are voluntary, right? If your audience doesn't know that. And so it's a frustration of ours at times where somebody's going to lose their housing or is not going to be able to get housed because their mental health is in such poor condition, and they refuse to get help for it. That's a sad situation, but it's a lot more frequent than it should be. It's their civil right to refuse that service, but it's also causing a significant amount of chronic homelessness in our opinion. So I think increased ability to engage people, as we're all trying already but the best we can do now is to try to engage them into accepting services, and then hoping that an adequate level of service is there. And why we have these higher rates of mental health and addiction, that's a bigger societal problem that should probably be talked about, maybe looked at sort of internationally, but they're definitely driving some of our homeless issues.
Yeah, we've talked before about individuals who are unwilling for whatever reason to accept the services. Can we do anything for those people to provide them with a better living situation? Now I'll open it up to whoever wants to answer that.
Well, we can. I mean, there's this whole concept called housing first, which is the trend right now by I kind of like to joke sometimes that primarily by academics that don't provide housing, but it's a great concept. But the idea is that housing is therapeutic, and which it is. It's part of a person's plan to get put back together as a whole and be successful. But what we have to remember is that folks live in community, and even their apartment complex where they live is a small community. So behavior becomes an issue when you live in any kind of community, and there has to be ways to sort of be able to get along in that setting. Now, maybe in a Hopes Village scenario, and I think Becky's probably on this Zoom, there might be some scenarios. Some people, I mean, there are some folks that I mean, there is a way to house folks, and we're doing it up in Paso right now. It's a housing first model, but it requires a lot of case management, and you hear many times about the cost savings that is going to result by getting the frequent flyers from out of our emergency rooms at the hospitals, out of our judicial system, out of the jail system. The jail system's the biggest detox and recovery place in almost any county, right? Because it defaults to being that. But there's a lot of money savings to be had by the community by housing these folks and helping them. But we're not really seeing the transfer of that savings into the supportive services that are needed for the housing. And that has to happen hand in hand with that. There's savings if they're not getting arrested and going through the jail system, savings if they're not in the ER once a week for something, etc.
Ken or Veronica, anything to add?
Yes, I'd like to add. It was mentioned earlier that services are voluntary. And I think it's really important for our community and even with our case managers that we have in our agency is that it does take time, does take patience to work with everyone. It won't be resolved overnight. We have an outreach team that goes out into these encampments and encourage folks to come seek our services. And it doesn't happen the first time that they'll come in. It may not even happen the 50th time, but eventually it does happen. And as long as we're patient and we're understanding of where they're at and meeting our folks where they're at and supporting them, eventually they do come in. We are able to help them and improve their situation. And I think that the main thing is, like what Scott says, it does take a lot of time. The case management does take a lot of time. There needs to be, some patience, some soft patience, and eventually folks will come in if we're just patient and continue to encourage.
Okay, thank you. Ken, anything else?
Just mostly to agree with both Scott. I know that Scott said the housing first model, and that's really the other term you're hearing more about is low barrier. So meaning, there just can't be a whole lot of things that get thrown up in front of folks to be able to even get into the shelter. That means we're going to need more support at the community level, though, really, to make that happen. So that's just one other thing to add.
Okay, I'd like to get to some of these questions from the audience here. So let me, here's one, first one. Doesn't it make sense to build more tiny homes, tiny houses? Anybody?
Yes, Scott mentioned that, and we're always trying to figure that out. The policy is getting there. Unfortunately, the financing has not caught up. Our typical sources aren't allowing us to do that quite yet. We keep pushing that, but I agree with Becky is the one who's written that question in. She's got a great model. It's working in certain communities. I would say too, there's no silver bullet. There's not one answer to this. Probably we need all kinds of things, and tiny homes can be one of those solutions. So hopefully we'll see more of those. They might perhaps fit into the ADU sort of scenarios that are happening, which hopefully that'll be something too that financing can help figure out. That's in addition to being small and more cost effective in some respects. That could help solve some of the multi-generational type things that we're seeing. If a tiny house in the form of even like maybe an ADU accessory dwelling unit goes along with a full size, if you will, single family home, that could be a way of getting at this. Or the village style where you've got a community there that supports each other as Becky's promoted. Hopefully that's coming. It's just sort of financing, I think, has been one thing that we're all struggling with. And the sources that are allowing that kind of thing have strings attached. And so it's always a challenge to overlap those kind of things.
Okay, and is that something that would require action at the local level to allow to have happen, the tiny homes?
A lot of the communities are doing that. So that's been a long process. That's why I say that I think the policy is sort of catching up. The ordinances are happening, but yeah, we continue to need to advocate for that. Really, I think it's coming into the realm of financing that we need to get at. I guess, our local banks, and as much as there are local banks anymore, community banks, if they can help us with financing now, creating products that fit this kind of a new model, that'll be helpful.
Okay. There's a question here about the Morro Bay project, and I don't know if you're all familiar with it, but this is a very recent, the motel, the Roadway Inn is going to be transformed into I believe it's a mental health and addiction project. And the question had to do with, does the state require that? Is that a state required that if it doesn't violate local zoning laws, must it be built and the public doesn't have a say in the matter?
I don't know the answer to that question. Speaking for myself, I know there are certain things with regard to housing right now that the state has gotten more assertive, I guess, in almost going to if there's zoning there and if it's affordable housing, then it almost is it's going more towards a by right. You almost have to approve it. But I know the project you're talking about in Morro Bay, but I'm not sure of all the details. That from a legal standpoint, if is it a by right kind of a thing? I can't really comment. I will comment that there's a shortage of that kind of service, kind of generically in the county. So both for mental health and addiction recovery.
Okay. And can public land be dedicated for housing?
It can, yeah. At the city, county, or state level, there's a surplusing process. The cities or counties need to just declare it as a surplus. That's a starting point. It can be an involved process, but it's certainly possible. The cities and counties, I think a lot of us go around and ask this question. But the answer is it's possible, yes.
Okay. And does the county have a by right policy?
I don't know that anybody has a by right. I think everybody is marching to the state drum roll on this, so to speak. So I think that the most that I've seen done is local governments trying to align their policies with fairly recent state law. And that takes a while to catch up sometimes to actually get on the books locally, but I'm not aware, Ken, you may be of that other than they're implementing what state law says must be done.
Yeah, I think that's right, Scott.
Okay.
In the case of the county.
Can somebody explain a smart share housing solution?
Well, smart share is they might be in the audience as well. So, but I don't know. What did it maybe formed 5 years ago? Great organization, great service. And they started with the concept that one way, there's a lot of different. The premise is that there's not one solution to our housing problem that we have, and this is one really great solution, which is looking at people that are overhoused, so to speak, and might be interested in renting a portion of their home. And oftentimes that it turned out to be a senior citizen or an empty nester, I should say, that maybe needed a 3 or 4 bedroom house at one point in time, but now their family's all moved out. They've got several extra rooms. So the idea is matching people that need housing with people that maybe could benefit not only from some extra income from renting a room, as well as there's a big social component of it as well, potentially. So that's the concept, and really the idea of you're creating more housing without really having to develop anything physical, because the housing's already there. It's just underutilized. And it's a pretty good service because they screen everybody, and they handle the application process.
Okay. Okay. What is the role of the hospitals to enroll patients in supportive services?
The hospital social worker will connect with organizations like ours, 40 Prado, and connect patients to services to access services that we offer to help them back into housing, or connect them with shelter opportunities.
Okay. And how can we increase collaboration between the public agencies, private developers, anybody else that's needed in the equation, I guess?
If I can just jump in, I would say, I think there's probably a lot more collaboration going on than anyone recognizes. Those of us that are in the trenches are regularly communicating collectively. I think the disconnect has been with the public at large, and to some degree with elected officials. And I think that collaboration is happening now. I think there's a greater recognition of the challenges. But I think it begins with education and ensuring that people come to understand what the various challenges and opportunities are, and the spectrum of services needed. And I think that's, for example, the league taking the lead on this and having these series of panel discussions exemplifies really what needs to happen, which is we just need continued outreach and education in terms of making sure that the public comes to understand just the complexity of the challenges before us.
Okay, here's a couple. Can't the county, city provide porta potties and garbage pickup at campsites instead of kicking people out? And temporary housing is better than no housing. There is so much open property that could be used for tenters or RVers to provide minimal stability until they can get into something more permanent. Anybody want to comment on that? I guess that's more of a comment than a question, but.
Oh, I think I'd like to join in. Again, this is Jana from the Five Cities Homeless Coalition. We very much agree on both cases. I will say that there are certainly costs involved in terms of dealing with trash and sanitation services. So at some level, it's a question of where does that funding come from, and what is the public will to make that happen. And then the other side is, as often is the case, location is everything. So where would these services be provided? Ultimately is the question, and we're certainly advocating shelter services, either congregate or non-congregate, here in South County. But anyone familiar with some of the challenges that we face is until you have a location to provide that service, you're really limited. And so again, that comes back to not only by right zoning issues, but also just the public will in terms of affecting change.
Right. And one last question, and this has to do with what level of government provides funding for housing, and this person wants to know where they should focus from an advocacy perspective.
I could start on that one. Yeah, a lot of the cities have funds that are set aside for this purpose. If they've collected through, like I mentioned, if they had a in lieu fee fund program, meaning private developers needed to pay in. That's one source at the local level, but a lot of the cities and here in our county, the county itself get allocations, federal allocations specific for housing. It comes down to the local level, and there's jurisdiction to advocate. Even as soon as tomorrow, there is at 1:30 at the Board of Supervisors, the county will we'll be conducting a hearing on the CDBG community block grant. Let's see, I skipped an initial in there. Community development block grant and the home funds. There's a bunch of funding, and that would be a good place for folks if they wanted to zoom in. Tomorrow at 1:30 is the start time for a couple items to talk about the funding, and could even advocate, but it's at least a starting point to hear what's happening and where those funds are going. I would encourage folks to try to jump on if they can.
Jana, you want to add anything?
Well, I would concur with Ken, and I think the Board of Supervisors meeting tomorrow is a good one for people to chime in on. In addition to the funding discussion that's going to happen tomorrow, the county is going to be reviewing kind of its concept plans on how it's planning to move forward in addressing some of the homeless issues. And for me, it really is a matter of advocating for action. And at least in our regard, it's a matter of finding those locations that would work. Financing is important and critical, obviously, on the housing side. From the services standpoint, we can provide all the services we want, but if we don't have a location from which to provide them, and to give people some housing stability as they're looking for permanent housing, then the challenge is doubly difficult. So I would encourage people, I think it's items number 25 and 29 on the agenda tomorrow that should have people's attention.
And Scott, you get the last word.
You know, on the funding thing, I would just say that we're almost 100% dependent on non-local resources, and so it's that's worth realizing. I mean, the money that we talk about pretty much is dependent on the whims of the federal budget, and all we're doing is you know, passing it through from the feds. It would be nice, and the local housing funds that we sometimes refer to, it's almost always either federal funding that's been appropriated or private money paid by private developers. It's really not city or county money. It's private developers who bought their way out of the inclusionary requirement. So they didn't provide the housing. They paid it into a fund, which sometimes can be really beneficial if there's any land to build the housing on left. But we can leverage it pretty well. So there's a good leverage. But my point is, we really don't have local sources. So yet we all have this problem, and we don't have financial resources to deal. So, you know, one way of looking at it is maybe the next time we put one of these sales tax measures on the ballot to raise sales tax, maybe we can include in there a tiny bit at least to deal with this problem, but we don't. And that's a bit of a frustration because we kind of sit back and wait for somebody to pay into the inclusionary housing fund, or we wait to see what the feds are going to appropriate for CDBG or something like that. But we really aren't doing any local resource generation.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank all of the panelists so much for a very great discussion. And I'm sorry we weren't able to get Veronica in at the beginning, but I'm going to now turn it back over to Cindy Marie. So thank you all.
Thank you. That was so interesting and illuminating. Thank you, Ken, Scott, Veronica, and Jana, an added bonus today, for your work on housing the homeless and addressing this humanitarian crisis in San Luis Obispo County. It truly is. You know, we really learned some really interesting things today about what can work, the inclusionary policies and plans, the conducting of the coordinated assessments of the barriers to getting housing, and then the importance of the regional and interagency collaborations. Those were the three themes that I continued to hear over and over again, and hopeful themes. Certainly there are still impediments and barriers to be overcome, but I think as we continue to educate ourselves and the community about this very complex problem, we'll move the ball forward. Thank you to webinar moderator Marlis McPherson and coordinator Glenn Silloway, who's off screen, and Zoom master Dave Humphreys for making this event possible today and the entire League series on homelessness. We do look forward to our 5th and final webinar that will wrap up the series with a date to be announced later, and hope that you will all join us for that. Now, please stay logged on just a little while for some contact information on our panelists and the League. Thank you all.